The Whitlow estate basked in the golden hush of late spring, its manicured gardens blooming under a sky too calm for what was about to unfold. Inside, the ancestral mansion sat quiet, too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lily Whitlow, 22, the youngest of Margaret Whitlow's grandchildren, had never been entirely at ease in the grand house. It was too polished, too heavy with memories she didn't share. She wandered the library that afternoon while the household bustled with preparations for the matriarch's grand Mother's Day celebration. Lily wasn't looking for anything in particular, just an escape from the sharp-edged conversations downstairs. She ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books, worn smooth by decades of pride and pretense. Then she saw it, the family Bible. Thick, dustless, reverently placed beneath a stained glass window. It seemed out of place on the shelf of war memoirs and legal tomes. Curiosity stirred. She lifted it carefully and carried it to the reading table. The Bible creaked open, the air catching a whiff of old paper and lavender sachet. Tucked just behind the back cover was something unexpected. A yellowing envelope, unsealed with her grandmother's elegant script across the front. It simply read, "For when the truth matters more than the legacy." Her pulse ticked faster. Lily hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. No one. She slid the letter out and unfolded it with care. The handwriting was Margaret's. But there was something brittle in the tone. Something fractured. The letter spoke of a decision made in desperation. A trade of one child for another. A truth buried to protect the name. It was incomplete, as if a page was missing, or had been torn out deliberately. Lily's hands trembled as she reread the lines. A child had been switched. Bloodlines had been altered. The legacy of the Whitlow family, long held as untouchable, was a house of cards built on silence. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. She quickly slipped the letter back into the Bible and replaced it on the shelf, but the words burned in her mind. That night, as the estate glittered with floral arrangements and polished silver, Lily looked at her grandmother with new eyes. Margaret sat at the head of the dinner table like a queen carved in stone, poised, commanding, unflinching. But now Lily knew. Something had cracked beneath that crown long ago. And this Mother's Day, the truth would rise, whether Margaret was ready or not. The Whitlow estate had weathered decades of holidays, weddings, and whispered scandals. But this Mother's Day weekend carried a strange electric weight, like the air before a thunderclap. They arrived one by one. First came Charles, Margaret's eldest son, stiff in his designer suit and carrying the weight of failed expectations beneath his polished smile. Behind him trailed his wife Deborah, whose loyalty to the Whitlow name had long outweighed her affection for the people who bore it. Their son Graham, the so-called heir apparent, rolled up in a sleek black car, sunglasses hiding the cold detachment of someone who knew exactly how the world worked and who it should work for. Then Eleanor, Margaret's only daughter, swept in late as usual. With her bohemian scarves and that theatrical flair she never outgrew, Eleanor was the family's tolerated rebel. Her teenage daughter Sadie followed silently behind, earbuds in, gaze fixed on her phone, watching, recording, listening more than anyone realized. By nightfall, the estate was alive with clinking glasses and careful conversation. In the dining room, silver candelabras gleamed over plates of salmon, moose, and arugula. The help moved through the rooms like ghosts, accustomed to serving power wrapped in silk and resentment. But beneath the fine wine and false laughter, everyone felt it. Something was off. Margaret Whitlow sat at the head of the long table, her posture rigid as ever, eyes sharp beneath snow-white hair. She looked every bit the monarch she was, controlled, composed, watching each of her children like pieces on a chessboard. She'd built her legacy through strategy and silence. But tonight, there was something in her gaze that flickered, just for a moment, as if some internal alarm had been triggered. She noticed Lily watching her from across the room, eyes filled with something Margaret couldn't quite place. Suspicion? Curiosity? Fear? When dessert was served, a sudden gust of wind rattled the dining room windows, drawing startled glances. A storm was coming in faster than the forecast predicted. Margaret's hand tightened around her glass. She had spent a lifetime silencing the past, sealing cracks before they spread. But some things don't stay buried, especially not when blood is involved. Upstairs, in the quiet of the library, the old Bible sat back on the shelf. Inside it, a secret still pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the tombstone, waiting, and somewhere in the house, someone else had started looking. The storm broke around midnight. Thunder cracked across the estate grounds like a war drum, and rain lashed against the tall windows as if trying to get in. Most of the family had retreated to their guest rooms, wine-drowsy and unaware of what was quietly igniting beneath their feet. But Lily hadn't slept. The letter haunted her. She couldn't shake the language, the only way to preserve what matters, as if a child had been nothing more than a pawn in a game of legacy. She needed answers. Real ones. And something in her gut told her someone else knew. It was near 2 a.m. when she heard it, a soft voice in the hallway just outside her bedroom door. She cracked it open just enough to see two silhouettes lingering at the far end of the corridor, Charles and Eleanor. She couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable. Urgent, tense, old wounds reopening like fresh cuts. "I told you we should have destroyed it," Eleanor hissed. Charles shook his head. "It was Margaret's call. We were just kids. We didn't get a say. And if that letter's out, it's already too late." Lily stepped back, heart thudding. What did they mean? Destroyed what? The next morning, the storm passed, but the house felt heavier than ever. Lily crept into the attic while the others were distracted with brunch and small talk. It was a maze of boxes and cedar chests, but she was drawn to a trunk marked Hospital Records, 1980. Her hands trembled as she flipped through old discharge papers and infant charts, until one detail sent a chill through her. 2 infants were listed under the Whitlow name on the same day, but only one had ever been acknowledged. One name had been erased. Downstairs, Graham and Sadie were arguing over inheritance rumors. In the conservatory, Deborah sipped her tea too quickly when Margaret entered the room, but Margaret said nothing. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift. There were eyes on her now, many more than before. By evening, a rumor had started circling like smoke through the house. One of the grandchildren might not be a Whitlow by blood. No one said it outright, but the silence was louder than any accusation. And upstairs, Lily stared at the hospital file in her lap, realizing what the letter had only hinted at. Someone had been taken from their cradle, and someone else had taken their place. The question now wasn't why Margaret did it. It was who, and worse, was the rightful heir still here or lost forever? The results came in a plain manila envelope, clinical, sterile, and far too small to hold the kind of truth that could demolish a dynasty. Lily found it tucked into the side pocket of Graham's leather duffel, unsealed. She didn't mean to open it, not really, but her hands moved faster than her conscience. And when she read the lab's header, Ancestry Diagnostics Incorporated, her stomach turned to lead. 3 DNA tests. 1 glaring inconsistency. Graham Whitlow, the presumed heir, bore no biological link to Charles, no paternal markers, no ancestral tie. The family's crown prince wasn't a Whitlow at all. Downstairs, the family prepared for the first official toast of the weekend. Charles adjusted his cufflinks, the Whitlow crest flashing in the chandelier's glow, oblivious to the fact that the bloodline he had sworn to preserve might already be extinct. At the fireplace, Eleanor and Deborah argued in hushed tones. "You're the one who said no one would question it," Deborah snapped. "You said we'd fake the test if we had to." "We didn't fake anything," Eleanor muttered. "Not yet. But someone already had." Somewhere between Margaret's secrets and Charles's ambition, someone had made a decision that reshaped an entire legacy. Lily confronted Graham first. He laughed when she showed him the results, dry, humorless, and hollow. "You think I didn't already know?" he said, folding the papers slowly. "You think she didn't?" "She?" Lily asked. He didn't answer. The news spread like wildfire. In a house already primed for combustion, it didn't take much. Charles accused Eleanor. Eleanor blamed the hospital records. Deborah fainted. Margaret, silent as a statue, said nothing. For once, no speech, no reprimand, no elegant manipulation. Just silence. And a single tear sliding down her powdered cheek. That night, Sadie posted a cryptic video on social media, flickering candlelight, muffled arguments, and one chilling caption, "Lies rot from the inside out." By morning, reporters had already begun circling the estate. But inside the house, no one cared about headlines anymore. The Whitlow name, once a symbol of power, tradition, and unbreakable bonds, had been reduced to a question mark. And one truth now hung over the family like a guillotine. The heir isn't Graham. The real heir is still out there, and they've been wronged. The phone call came at dawn, cold and disembodied, cutting through the silence of the Whitlow estate like a blade. Lily had only just fallen asleep, her mind reeling from the bombshells of the night before. She was jolted awake by the shrill ring of her cell phone, and when she answered, the voice on the other end was familiar, but impossibly so. "Lily, it's me, Evelyn." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Evelyn. The name sounded like a distant echo from the past, but it couldn't be. Evelyn had been gone for years, buried alongside the scandalous whispers of Margaret's youth. She was the one who had supposedly died in a tragic car accident all those years ago. The one no one ever spoke about. The one Margaret had hidden, erased, like a ghost from the family's history. Except Evelyn wasn't dead, and neither was the truth. Lily's pulse raced as she stumbled to sit up, gripping the edge of the nightstand for support. "How is this possible? How?" "I'm alive, Lily," the voice on the other end said, calm but full of grief. "I have been for a long time, but now it's time for you to know everything. Time for you to know why your family isn't what they say they are." The connection crackled, static breaking through the conversation like a warning. The line went dead before Lily could ask more. Her hands shook as she dropped the phone onto the bed. Lily didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, she searched the estate from top to bottom, but she couldn't find a single trace of Evelyn. The name that had once been an unspoken ghost now hovered over everything, just out of reach, pulling at the fabric of the Whitlow family's carefully curated image. By the time morning came, the house was abuzz with a different kind of energy, one that sent cold ripples down Lily's spine. The story about the heir had taken root. But the truth about Evelyn, Margaret's missing daughter, was about to break it all wide open. While the others gathered downstairs for breakfast, Margaret slipped away quietly, disappearing into her study. She locked the door, the faintest tremor in her hand as she picked up the phone. But this time, she didn't dial her lawyer. She didn't call a private investigator. She dialed a number she had long since forgotten. "Evelyn," Margaret whispered into the receiver, her voice tight with fear. "Where are you?" The walls of the Whitlow estate had heard whispers for decades, but as the clock ticked toward the late afternoon, the whispers grew louder. The air in the house had thickened with secrets, and Margaret's facade of control was cracking at the seams. Lily's mind kept returning to the conversation with Evelyn, the truth she couldn't ignore. There were questions she needed answered, truths that seemed too wild to be true, but deep down she could feel them pressing down on her like a vice. She needed to confront Margaret. Margaret was in the garden when Lily found her, standing by the fountain with her back turned. The rain had started again, light and steady, turning the rose petals into smudges of pink and red. The scene should have felt serene, but there was an undercurrent of tension, something fragile and ready to snap. "Grandmother," Lily said, her voice unsteady. Margaret didn't turn around, but Lily could see the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hands fluttered at her sides. She had known this confrontation was coming, and yet she wasn't ready for it. "What is it, Lily?" Margaret's voice was strained, a sharp edge beneath her otherwise composed exterior. "You lied," Lily blurted. "You lied about everything." Margaret finally turned to face her, her eyes narrowing, hard and cold. "What are you talking about?" "You didn't just lose Evelyn," Lily said, taking a step closer. "You never lost her. You kept her hidden, didn't you?" Margaret's face shifted, just for a moment, before she regained her usual icy composure. "That's nonsense." "No, it's not," Lily's voice broke. "I found her. I heard her. She's alive, Margaret. She's been alive for years." Her chest tightened with the weight of it all. "Why? Why would you hide her?" For a moment, the world seemed to still. The only sound was the quiet drip of water falling from the leaves above. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she finally spoke the truth Lily had been seeking. "I didn't want to. I didn't have a choice." Her eyes darted away, looking toward the horizon as if the answer lay somewhere far in the distance. "Your grandfather, the man I loved, he was from a rival family. And he was never supposed to know about her." Lily's breath caught. A forbidden affair. Margaret's eyes flicked back to hers, and for the first time, the walls around her cracked. "He promised to run away with me, to take her with us. But it was never meant to be. He betrayed me, Lily. He abandoned us." "Who was he?" Lily whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Margaret's gaze hardened once again, the mask snapping back into place. "No one you need to know about. What matters now is that the past is gone. Evelyn is gone. You need to move on, Lily." Lily could see it then. The pain, the regret, the deep-seated fury that had shaped Margaret's decisions. She wasn't just a mother protecting her family's legacy. She was a woman broken by love, crushed by betrayal. And the lie she had woven had cost her more than just her daughter. It had cost her soul. "I'm not letting this go," Lily said, her voice firm, unyielding. "The truth will come out. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same." Margaret turned away, the soft sound of raindrops beating against the stone at her feet the only response. But Lily could see the battle in her eyes. The storm was coming, and it would tear them all apart. The air inside the Whitlow estate had shifted from tense to volatile, thick with the pressure of revelations and betrayals that could no longer be ignored. Margaret knew it was only a matter of time before the past would come crashing down around them, but what she didn't expect was the storm that arrived early. The reading of the will was supposed to be a ceremonial event, a quiet, respectful moment where the family would sit in reverent silence, paying homage to the legacy Margaret had so carefully built. But as the lawyer Daniel Foster arrived ahead of schedule, it became clear that nothing about this moment would be typical. "We've encountered some discrepancies," Daniel began, his voice calm but carrying an unsettling edge. "There appears to have been a break-in last night. Several documents were tampered with, including the official will." Lily felt a chill race down her spine. She hadn't heard the full details yet, but she already knew what was coming. Margaret's carefully laid plans, the blueprint of the Whitlow dynasty, was about to shatter. A murmur swept through the room as the family gathered in the study. Graham stood by the fireplace, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and confusion. Charles, as usual, held his ground with an air of superiority, though his knuckles were white as they gripped the back of a chair. Daniel unfolded the pages of the will with deliberate slowness, the rustle of paper like the final countdown to disaster. The will, as it was intended to be read, was never properly executed. Some clauses were omitted, Clause A, to be specific, regarding the inheritance of the family estate and fortune. A sudden silence followed, deep and unsettling. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. The inheritance was in question. The power, the wealth, the legacy of the Whitlow name, it all rested on what was written in the will, and now that foundation had cracked. "What are you saying?" Graham's voice was a low growl, but the anger in his tone only served to underscore his panic. Daniel's gaze shifted to Margaret, but she stood frozen, her face ashen. "The true structure of the inheritance, as stated in the original will, does not match the version we've been holding on to for the last few months." Charles leaned forward, his usual poise slipping. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. "Are you telling me the fortune isn't mine?" "Not exactly." Daniel glanced at the papers again, his fingers trembling slightly. "The original document names a different heir." Lily's heart skipped. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, though she knew the answer was inevitable. Daniel took a deep breath before he read aloud from the will. "The family fortune and estate, including all assets and holdings, shall pass to Evelyn Whitlow, child of Margaret Whitlow and Richard Carrington." The words hung in the air like poison, sinking into the atmosphere and spreading like wildfire. Evelyn, the daughter who had been erased from the family tree, the secret that Margaret had buried so deep that no one dared speak her name. "Impossible," Charles bellowed. "She's dead." "You're saying we've been living a lie?" Daniel didn't respond. There was no need. The truth was laid bare. Margaret, her face as pale as a ghost, finally spoke, her voice shaking with both fury and helplessness. "No, Evelyn is not dead. She never was." Her eyes flitted nervously between the family, each one of them staring back at her as though she were a stranger. "And I made the choice to keep her from you." "Why?" Graham asked, his voice quieter now, yet full of disbelief. "Why keep us in the dark?" Margaret closed her eyes, as though the weight of the past was too much to bear. "Because I thought it would protect you all. I thought it would protect the legacy." Lily stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and sorrow. "And look where we are now. It's all falling apart because of your lies, Grandma." The room erupted into chaos. Accusations were hurled. Voices raised in anger, disbelief, and betrayal. And amidst the growing fury, Margaret stood at the center of it all, a woman torn between the truth she had hidden for so long and the family she had tried to protect. As the storm raged around her, Margaret knew there was no going back. The truth had already been set in motion. And now, as the rightful heir began to step forward, the Whitlow dynasty was about to come undone, piece by piece. The Mother's Day banquet had begun, though no one truly felt like celebrating. The grand dining room of the Whitlow estate, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now felt suffocating. The tension in the air was palpable, and every eye in the room was either trained on Margaret or darting nervously between each other. As the guests took their seats, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. The family had no reason to suspect anything unusual. But then, the door to the banquet hall creaked open, and the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. A man. He wasn't part of the Whitlow family, at least not anyone they recognized. His presence seemed to freeze the very air in the room. "Who the hell is this?" Graham's voice was thick with a mix of anger and confusion as he stood from his seat, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped further into the room, his movements calculated, deliberate. He was tall, with sharp features and dark hair that looked freshly combed. But it wasn't his appearance that caused a ripple of discomfort. It was the icy certainty with which he walked, as if he knew exactly where he was going and what he was about to do. "Margaret Whitlow?" the man asked, his voice cool, calm, and carrying an undeniable authority. Margaret's eyes widened, and her hand instinctively gripped the edge of her chair. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled slightly, though she did her best to maintain her composure. The man smiled faintly, though there was nothing warm in the gesture. "I think you know who I am." The room grew even quieter, the sounds of cutlery scraping against china, the low murmurs of conversation. Everything stopped. All eyes were on this intruder who had just shattered whatever semblance of normalcy had been left in the room. "Let me introduce myself," the man continued. "My name is Elijah Carrington." The shock in the room was immediate and deafening. Elijah Carrington. The name fell like a thunderclap, reverberating through the gathered family members, some of whom were now exchanging confused, uneasy glances. The Carringtons had always been a rival family, one tied to scandal and whispered stories of betrayal, but what was Elijah's connection to them? And then it hit them. The last name. The same surname as Richard Carrington, the man who had once been the love of Margaret's life. "No," Margaret whispered, shaking her head slightly as if the very mention of the name caused physical pain. "No, you. This is a mistake." Elijah took another deliberate step forward, his gaze unwavering and his voice hardened with barely contained fury. "A mistake?" "No, Margaret. There is no mistake. I'm the son of Richard Carrington and Evelyn Whitlow." The room fell into stunned silence. A collective gasp echoed through the gathered guests. It was as if time itself had slowed, the truth hanging in the air like a thick, oppressive fog. "I've waited a long time for this moment," Elijah continued, his voice now laced with a mix of sorrow and rage. "I've waited for the moment when the Whitlow family would finally have to face what you've done. You destroyed my mother, and you thought you could erase her. Erase me. But I'm not a ghost. I'm not some inconvenient truth you can bury." Lily's heart pounded as she looked from Elijah to Margaret, her mind racing. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the missing link in the chain of lies Margaret had tried so hard to protect. Elijah Carrington, the son of the woman Margaret had kept hidden, the heir to the Whitlow fortune that had been stolen from him. "You're lying," Graham barked, his face flushing red with anger and disbelief. "There's no way you can be." Elijah turned his steely gaze to Graham, silencing him with a single look. "You're right about one thing, Graham. I'm not one of you. I'm not a Whitlow. I'm the son of the woman you thought was dead. And that makes me the rightful heir to this family's legacy." Margaret's expression was one of sheer devastation. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to stand, but the words refused to come. How could she explain herself now? How could she ever justify the decisions that had led her to this point? To this uninvited guest standing in her midst, demanding everything she tried to protect. "I've come for what's mine," Elijah continued, his gaze now fixed firmly on Margaret. "And I'm not leaving until the Whitlow name is mine, until this family finally admits the truth. You can no longer hide behind your lies, Margaret. The truth will be known." The silence in the room was deafening as Elijah's words settled over everyone. Margaret's empire, carefully constructed over decades, was unraveling before their very eyes. "You're not welcome here," Margaret finally said, her voice low and bitter, but there was no more fire in her words, only resignation. "I wasn't invited," Elijah replied coldly, "but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." As Elijah stood tall at the center of the Whitlow family's gathering, one thing was certain: the battle for the Whitlow legacy had only just begun. The Whitlow estate, once a symbol of unity and power, had turned into a battlefield. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the elegant dining hall that had been the scene of many celebrations now felt like a war room. The family had splintered, and with each passing hour, it became clear that this was no longer a fight over a legacy. It was a fight for survival. Elijah Carrington stood at the center of the storm, his presence casting a long shadow over the room. Half of the Whitlow family had rallied behind him, some with cold-eyed conviction, others with reluctant acceptance, while the other half clung fiercely to Margaret. They couldn't or wouldn't believe the truth he had laid bare before them. The man they thought they knew, their matriarch, had betrayed them all in a way that was unforgivable. The walls of the estate seemed to close in as arguments erupted from all corners. Family members who had once shared everything now turned on each other, their loyalty tested by bloodlines and the price of truth. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her regal composure shattered. The queen of the Whitlow Empire, the woman who had kept her family's dirty secrets buried for decades, was no longer in control. Her cold gaze flickered between the faces of her children, each one now standing in judgment of her actions. "I can't believe you kept this from me," Richard, her eldest son, spat. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands clenched in fury. "You've been lying to us for years. All this time you've protected a man who's not even part of this family." "I did what I thought was right," Margaret whispered, though there was no strength in her voice. "I protected you. I protected this family." "By destroying it?" Richard's voice rose, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "This family is already dead, Mother. You just didn't want to admit it." Elijah, standing off to the side with his arms crossed, let the words hang in the air. He was no longer a stranger. He was a force. And the Whitlow family's reputation, their fortune, and their future now lay in his hands. "Enough, Richard." Graham, Margaret's second son, barked. "What do you expect her to say? What are we supposed to do now? Just accept this outsider into our family?" "You mean accept the truth, Graham," Elijah shot back, his voice smooth and unyielding. "The truth you've been hiding from for decades. You've always known that your mother wasn't perfect. That she wasn't the saint you thought she was." "You don't get to talk about my mother like that," Graham snapped, his face flushed with anger. Lily, who had been silent for most of the chaos, now stood, her hands trembling as she tried to take in the gravity of the situation. She had known something was off for a long time, but this was a betrayal of a different magnitude. Elijah's words had torn apart the life she thought she knew, and now she felt caught between two worlds. One where she had been blindly loyal to her grandmother, and one where the truth threatened to engulf her. "Lily?" Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough to draw her granddaughter's attention. Her eyes were desperate, searching for some shred of loyalty, some glimmer of support. But Lily couldn't find it. Not anymore. "I don't know what to believe, Grandma," Lily replied, her voice shaky but firm. "I can't ignore this anymore. You've kept secrets from all of us. And now Now everything is falling apart." The room fell silent again. The weight of Lily's words settled over everyone, and for a brief moment even Margaret seemed to falter. She had always thought she could hold the family together. But this was a war she couldn't win. In the midst of the chaos, Amelia, Margaret's younger daughter, spoke up, her voice trembling with emotion. "We need to think about what happens next. This is bigger than us. This is about our legacy, our future. We can't just let this divide us." But Elijah wasn't interested in reconciliation. He had come for justice, and justice wasn't about making peace. It was about claiming what was his. "Your mother's legacy isn't what you think it is," Elijah said, his eyes narrowing as he focused on Margaret. "She built it on lies. And I'm here to take back what was stolen from me, from my mother." "Stop it," Richard shouted, his voice breaking. "You're tearing us apart. What do you want, Elijah? What will make you happy? Money? Power? A name?" "I want what's rightfully mine," Elijah said coldly, never breaking eye contact with Richard. "I want what was taken from my mother. I want the Whitlow name, the fortune, everything. And if that means watching this family crumble under the weight of its own lies, then so be it." The tension in the room was unbearable. The once great Whitlow family, held together by lies, was now on the verge of collapse. Old wounds were being reopened, and every family member had to face the question of where their loyalty lay. As the night wore on, the arguments grew fiercer, the accusations sharper. The family was fractured, half of them standing by Margaret, the other half backing Elijah, who stood as a symbol of everything they had tried to bury. The truth had come to light, but there was no easy way to fix what had been broken. And in the midst of it all, the estate, once the proud home of the Whitlow dynasty, felt more like a prison than a palace. The walls that had witnessed years of triumph now seemed to echo with the sounds of betrayal and division. The sun dipped low behind the sprawling hills of the Whitlow estate, casting long shadows across the marble halls that once gleamed with pride. Now, silence reigned. The family had scattered, some into corners of the mansion, others into themselves. But for Margaret Whitlow, there was no place left to hide. Her past had finally caught up to her, and the reckoning had arrived. The courtroom was small, an old chamber in the county courthouse, but it might as well have been a cathedral. The air inside was stiff with the presence of legacy, betrayal, and the collective grief of a family unraveled. Margaret sat at the defense table, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes hollow. The once unshakable matriarch now looked like a ghost of herself. Opposite her stood Elijah Carrington, tall and composed in a crisp navy suit. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was the living consequence of a secret buried for over 50 years. In his hand he held the letter, the one from the Bible, the one that started it all. The courtroom was packed with spectators, press, and distant family members, all waiting for the final blow. The judge called the hearing to order. It wasn't a criminal trial, at least not officially, but emotionally, morally, and financially, it might as well have been. Elijah's claim wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about identity, about justice, about tearing down the gilded lie Margaret had constructed and replacing it with the raw, messy truth. As the attorneys began their arguments, testimony after testimony unraveled the sanitized history of the Whitlow name. The DNA results were irrefutable. Elijah was Margaret's biological son. He had been given away, replaced, buried in lies to protect a scandalous affair. But it wasn't just the affair or the secret birth that shocked the court. It was what happened afterward. A key witness emerged, Dorothy Hale, the longtime housekeeper who had vanished mysteriously decades ago. A frail but determined woman now in her 70s, Dorothy appeared as if summoned by fate. "I was there the night the child was taken," she said, her voice trembling. "And I was there when the other baby, the one Margaret raised, died in the nursery. It was a fever. Margaret panicked. She told me no one could know. That if anyone found out, it would destroy the Whitlow name," the courtroom gasped. She replaced her dead baby?" Lily whispered to her mother, wide-eyed with horror. "Not just replaced him," Dorothy continued. "She took Elijah, her other son, the one born from the affair, and had his identity buried, paid the hospital, threatened me." Told me I'd be buried alongside the truth if I ever spoke a word. Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs to outrage. Margaret did not deny it. For the first time, she stood. "I did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper but loud enough to cut through the room like a blade. "I did it because I had no choice. My son died. In Elijah, he was the only piece of my heart I had left. But I couldn't raise him as mine. Not with the scandal. Not with the legacy we were building. So I lied. I lied to save us all." "You didn't save anyone," Elijah said, stepping forward. "You erased me. You let me grow up in foster homes, watching your face on magazine covers, hearing stories of the perfect Whitlow family while I wondered who I was. You built a dynasty out of ashes and expected no one would ever smell the smoke. Silence, crushing, final." The judge declared Elijah's right to claim a full share of the estate and directed an independent review of all Whitlow family financials. But for Elijah, the victory wasn't monetary, it was the vindication. The truth had been spoken, in the light of day at last. Back at the estate, the family gathered for the last time. The house was being put up for sale. Lily stood on the porch with Elijah, her face etched with pain and awe. "So what now?" she asked. Elijah glanced at the setting sun, its amber glow washing over the cracked stone of the once mighty Whitlow mansion. "Now," he said, "now the ghosts rest. But the living have to find their own way forward." Margaret, alone in the parlor, stared out the window as dusk fell. She was no longer the queen of the house, just a woman who had gambled with fate and lost everything. Outside, the Whitlow name still shimmered on the estate gates, but beneath it, in fresh paint, was a new inscription. Truth before legacy. The past had been exposed, the lies scorched by sunset. And though the Whitlow name might endure in court documents and headlines, the family that once bore it had been forever changed.